Hi everyone, Lee Pacchia here from Mimesis Labs. We're taping at New York Law School today, where we're talking with Professor Deborah Archer about some of the things the law can do in order to improve relations between minority communities and police departments around the country. Professor, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
So looking at the events of recent months with the Michael Brown case and Eric Garner and now Akai Gurley, it's clear that we have a serious problem in this country, and many of us have known that for quite a while, and some of us are just coming around to that fact more recently. It's borne out in the numbers of incidents and fatalities involving minorities when interacting with the police. As a law professor and educator, what, if anything, can the law do to help change the relationship between police and minorities in this country?
I think we are having seeing a lot of trouble between police and citizen interactions, because we have an increasing acceptance in our culture, in our legal culture, in our everyday culture, of violence as a response to any perceived threat. So I think we'll see in some of our criminal justice laws that police are allowed to respond to minor crimes and infractions with a lot more force than many citizens in minority communities are comfortable with. In the Eric Garner case, he was selling loose cigarettes, which is an infraction that should get you a summons. But instead, we saw on the videotape that the police used a considerable amount of force to arrest him. And people in minority communities or in other communities question whether or not police should be more focused on de-escalating the situation and using amount of force that is commensurate with the infraction. So certainly, to the extent that our law encourages that by protecting that behavior on the tail end, I think we can look to reforms in that direction as well. I do think we have a general problem with over-aggressive policing and over-policing in minority communities. We have seen increasing segregation, residential segregation along racial lines. And we also, at the same time, have this sense that those minority communities that result from the segregation are in need of more police presence. So it's hard to be a citizen in those communities without having regular, everyday interactions with the police. And when you're interacting with the police in such a regular and constant way, it's difficult for there not to be incidents like the one that we've seen.
You've been following this stuff for quite a long time. And from your last answer, it seems to me that you think the problem in this country is getting worse than it was before?
I do. I think we're having we're seeing more and more where we are okay with an aggressive response to a perceived threat. And that's a string that I think we see with the Eric Garner case. We saw that with Trayvon Martin. We see that with Akai Gurley, that you're in a dark hallway so you can pull out a gun and have your finger on the trigger. I think we're seeing more and more that there have been excessive responses to any perceived threat. And what we're seeing in the police department, actually, I think is just a really extreme example of what's going on in our community. The police are often responding to calls from citizens who see these threats where there aren't real threats, like the Tamir Rice case, which is the young boy who was playing with a toy gun in the playground, and the police were responding to a call from a citizen who said there's a black man waving a gun in the playground.
A 12-year-old kid, and,
That's right.
and the police shot him from basically a moving vehicle.
That's
Terrible
absolutely
case.
Right.
You've mentioned a couple times in this interview that there's an increasing acceptance of violence in society, but also violence coming from the state. That's a depressing sentiment, but I also happen to think that is probably accurate. Where do you think this is coming from?
Well, some of it is coming from court decisions that aren't sanctioning police officers for use of force. So I think that impacts their behavior because they're guided by what courts say are allowable. And so if the court says that you can respond, you can chase someone off a cliff if they're fleeing by car, then police aren't going to pull themselves back in that type of situation. If the court says that you can put someone in a chokehold and use that level of force because someone is perceived to be resisting arrest when they actually should be given a summons, I think police respond to that. So one thing we can do is in the court system is to look at those decisions that are sanctioning the use of police force, and then the response that the community is giving in response to use of police force. Too often, those folks are viewed as thugs, or that they deserved it, or they shouldn't have resisted arrest, they shouldn't have tried to flee. And so we have to look at how the community is responding, because the community is also saying that it's okay.
What about court action? To what extent is going to court, having a community's voice in the courtroom, going to have an effect on the current situation? I mean, is filing more cases, is that something you necessarily view as something that's going to have a concrete impact in on the status quo, or is it
Well, it won't have an impact if the courts are still following this line of cases that allow the police to use a great deal of force. The courts are very protective of police and the authority that they have and the ability that they have when they're interacting with the community. And to a certain extent, I absolutely agree that we need to make sure that police officers have every tool available to them to make sure that our communities are safe, to make sure that they feel that they are safe and that they can do their jobs effectively. But at the same time, that shouldn't come at the expense of the rights of the members in those communities. So I'm not sure that going to court in increasing numbers will help if we're not also changing the way that the law views these interactions. We're also in the middle of an access to justice crisis, where I don't know that these folks are going to be able to find the representation that they need in order to effectively bring these cases.
Should the federal government be doing more to help this situation?
I think the federal government can do more. We've seen that they've come in and launched an investigation following some of these cases more recently. But I do think the federal government can be far more actively involved to make sure that these police killings are not the result of violations of civil rights laws.
Professor, thank you for stopping by and talking to us.
Thank you.
That's Professor Deborah Archer from New York Law School. If you'd like to see more of the stuff they're working on, be sure to go check them out at nyls.edu. I'm Lee Pacchia. Thanks for watching. See you next time.